All right, well, let's get started. Perhaps more people will join us. So our presenters tonight are Kim Kulton and Pete Soltesz. Soltesz, I'm sorry.
You got it. No, you're good, Dan.
They are partners in a conservation organization, Illinois Bee Rescue. They have many hives in both Illinois and Wisconsin. They travel around the country helping farmers with pollination in addition to the hives that they run on their own. Kim is originally from Elmhurst, Illinois. She has a varied background, majoring in biology, chemistry, and anthropology at Northern Illinois University. She began her career as an entomologist with the state of Illinois monitoring mosquito populations, and she was the first to confirm the presence of West Nile virus in Illinois. She got involved, or formed, I should say, Illinois Bee Rescue when she got a call from a friend inviting her to come over and watch a beekeeper remove a swarm of bees from her home. Pete also has a varied background. He went to Annapolis, studied systems engineering, and served in the Navy. His introduction to bees came as a young boy growing up in rural Pennsylvania. His parents were passionate gardeners and bees. In fact, they were passionate about both gardening and bees, and much of what they ate was foods that they had grown. Pete got involved with bees in 2010 when his mom came to visit and decided his garden needed a colony of bees. That went from, he got one hive, and that led to 2, then 12, then 42. And at the height of this past season, there were nearly 100 colonies. So without any further introductions, Pete and Kim.
Yay, thank you. Thanks, Dan, thank you for the introduction. I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. And as Kim and I were traveling on our way here this evening, we were kind of reflecting on our relationship with the village of Riverside and Olmsted, and realizing as we're driving here that we're trying to get to the library, and we had to make 3 left turns and a right turn to get to the parking lot here, but we followed the contour of the land, and that's exactly how Olmsted would have wanted it. But we have a special, I think, a special relationship with him on a number of levels, and we'll talk a little bit about that throughout the presentation. The other thing we were thinking about too is we're driving past the Brookfield Zoo. A little over a year ago, they reached out to us and asked us if we could help them build a special display hive. And that dream came to fruition this past November. And today there's over 1,000 school-age children a day that walk through the Hamel Children's Zoo and see this observation hive, this pair of observation hives that we designed. And it's very, I'd have to say it's probably one of our most proud accomplishments. So I'm not going to ramble on. Why don't we start the presentation and let's see. So I should start out with, first of all, special thanks to Dan. Dan reached out to us and very patiently set up the evening pardon? Okay. Kim's telling me to project my voice, so I'll go ahead and do that. And Diane Silva. Diane, I saw you. She was helping us set up. She's probably upstairs. She helped us. There she is. Thank you, Diane. She helped us set up the equipment tonight. And of course, special thanks to the Olmsted Society for inviting us, and the Riverside Public Library staff who, if you look at this old building, you have such a modern library in such an old building. It's so neat to see that. And the staff is very kind and accommodating here, so I want to make sure they know how much we appreciate them. So normally we go through and do some introductions, and Dan, you did a fabulous job. There is one part I should say about Kim. I'll just add to it is, how she got interested in keeping bees. And I think you mentioned it. Kim's friend invited her to come watch this beekeeper take bees out of the roof of her home. And Kim was there and a bunch of her other friends, and you know, they were kind of celebrating. They had a glass of wine and they were listening to music, and they opened the window, and there's the beekeeper standing out on the scaffolding with bees flying everywhere and covered in honey, and you know, removing the comb. And Kim decides she's going to roll up her sleeves and climb out onto the scaffolding and give this beekeeper a hand, okay? And I think that's how she got the bug, and that's when she decided to get into beekeeping and later form Illinois Bee Rescue. The part of the story that wasn't told, though, is who was that beekeeper? Okay, well, that beekeeper was me, okay? And we, you know, I was taking the bees out, and we have been together. We have not been apart a day ever since then. So we run our whole business together, and it's quite a daunting task, but I think we've come a long way. So we'll share some of that journey with you. And Dan, thank you for the kind introduction. Hey, if I seem like a little off, okay, it's just because I was on a submarine, okay? I was in the Navy, and I spent over 120 days, you know, more than 60 feet, you know, more than 300 feet underwater, actually, with 120 guys, and long time underwater. It does crazy things to your head. So bear with me if I you know, have an odd sense of humor. That's how submariners are. So. Let's talk about our company, Illinois Bee Rescue. We're involved in a lot of things, but I mean, so too are the bees. We collect swarms of honeybees. We remove and relocate honeybee nests, and we relocate native bees. So by native bees, I'm referring to things like bumblebees, carpenter bees. Did you ever see those little perfectly round 5/8" holes in your trim? Okay, most people pick up the phone and they call one of the pest control companies, and they come and they spray them. But what they don't realize is that they are very important pollinators. In fact, pound for pound, they move as much pollen as a bumblebee. And in fact, they're pretty close to being the same in terms of their capability for that. So there's definitely not something that you want to destroy. And Kim and I developed a process over the last more than 10 years of how to actually relocate them, mitigate the damage that they do, and prevent them from coming back. In fact, Will County has us, Will County has us on retainer for some of their nature centers. They're beautiful nature centers. They're out in nature, out in the prairies and the wilderness, and you know, they're made out of these beautiful timbers, and unfortunately the carpenter bees feast on them, and they make them look like Swiss cheese. So we get the call for that. We also breed queen bees. We produce honeybees. In fact, if you were to go visit my driveway and our home in a trailer, there's some honeybees that are getting ready to be picked up by some new beekeepers tomorrow morning at 5:30 a.m. to install into some beehives. We provide pollination services. We'll talk about that. We design apiaries, and we do consulting work, you know, for institutions that are trying to expand their presence in the environment. I should say not expand their presence. They're trying to have a kind, gentle impact on the environment, and they'd like to find ways to support pollinators. So they check in with us, and we share ideas, and we help them establish programs and practices to do that. We teach beekeeping classes, and we do presentations to raise public awareness. So let's talk about Olmsted for a second. If you look at this picture, has anyone been to Williams Bay, to the Yerkes Observatory? Yeah, that's a very recognizable building there in the background. What you may not recognize is that pollinator prairie in the foreground. Okay, that was not part of the original Olmsted design. Okay, in fact, you know, the observatory is now run by the Yerkes Future Foundation took over from the University of Chicago. And the Yerkes Future Foundation, their charter, when they were looking, their goal is to restore the landscape today exactly as it was per the plan that Olmsted had originally designed. Yet, with some enhancements to say, if Olmsted were alive today and were designing things today, what would he do different? What other things would he take into consideration? And knowing how important it was in his design elements to to factor in the contour of the earth and nature and conservation. He said, I'll bet he would design a pollinator prairie. Okay, so I'd say about 10 acres of the grounds are now committed to native plants and native species of grasses and flowers and such. And that's how we got the call. The staff of the Yerkes Future Foundation, it's like, well, if you plant it, they will come, right? Or you've heard that saying before, if you build it, they will come. Well, it doesn't necessarily work that way with pollinators, okay? A lot of folks don't realize most native pollinators will only travel maybe 100 yards or so in their lifespan, from where they're born to where they expire in the entire course of their life. Draw a circle around them, about the size of a football field, and that's all the further they travel. So if we clip down their meadows, or take away the prairie grass, or cut down the stand of trees that they were born in, it's not like they can just pack their bags and go down the street a little further, or a couple hundred yards or a mile down the road where there's abundance. They're vanquished when those types of things happen. So we have to be very sensitive to it. So they did build this wonderful pollinator prairie, and we got a call because of our involvement with native pollinators, and we were asked if we could help them stock or replenish the pollinators. As I mentioned in the previous slide, one of the things we do, we talked about carpenter bees quite a bit. Bumblebees, for example, there's always bumblebees popping up underneath porch stoops, underneath sidewalks. Bumblebees they're tunnelers, and so when we went to visit, our first visit was in spring. You'd expect to see queen bumblebees flying around, and the grounds hadn't quite taken hold yet, and we didn't really see much activity at all of any pollinators. If you were to go there today, you'd see all species of them, and so it has been quite a journey, for them, up there, and their actions of planting the native plants, providing habitat for these native species of pollinators, and minimizing the use of pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides has I think really had a strong local impact on it. And if I were a pollinator, I think that Yerkes Observatory would probably be my #1 place where I would want to go, where I would want to live. I mean, look at that buffet table in front of you there, right? They asked us if we could help connect their guests and their visitors to the pollinators, okay? And the honeybee I would say, is kind of the perfect ambassador for that, because Kim and I probably do presentations to over 1,000 school-age kids every single year, and it's funny. I think some of the kids are absolutely brilliant and probably could be a beekeeper, that afternoon if that's what they wanted to do with their knowledge level. However, most of the kids and their parents, okay, if I were to ask them, what's the source of protein for a pollinator? What is their source of protein? It's a blank stare. What's their source of carbohydrate? and when they start thinking about nourishment and what nutrition and what these insects and species of insects need to be able to survive, they're not necessarily able to connect the dots. And when they find out that pollen is the source of protein, it's this big aha moment, for them. They all understand honey, and that honey's natural and it tastes good. But how does it go from being collected from a flower to being created, the nectar being cured and winding up being bottled and on the table. So it's fun to do that. These are some of our hive designs at the Yerkes Observatory. If you go there and you can find the apiary in the northwest corner of the grounds. The center hive there has the Wisconsin state bird, the robin, and the wood violet is the state flower. So we really enjoy our time and our visits with them there. The other connection we have, I think, with the community here locally is with the Brookfield Zoo. They asked us if we have experience with observation hives, and they wanted to have a design where children could come in and see, look through the glass and see the inner workings of a hive, watch the queen lay eggs, and see the worker bees bring the pollen into the hive and feed the queen. And is it possible to design that? And up until recently, most observation hive designs were very basic. They were just a hive inside a glass case. And so Kim and I put our heads together, literally the two of us, and thought about that. And the other challenge with these observation hives is they had a very low survival rate. Because if you think about it, if you set up a beehive inside, as a beekeeper, when or how could you ever go in and do any maintenance on that hive, right? The minute you go and open the hive, the bees are loose and they're flying around. And can you imagine at the zoo with thousands of kids in every day opening the hive up to do the maintenance, right? It would never work. So we came up with a design, and we're in the process of patenting this right now. It's called a cassette hive, and it's got a series of interlocking gates that we can shut on the outside and on the inside and open the outer case and have the inner case completely contained and remove that from the wall, take it outside, open it up, take care, do the maintenance things we need to do, inspect the hive, make sure that the queen is in great shape and the bees are doing what they need to do, close it back up and take it in, put it back in. And it works great. But I have to tell you, every great design, you go through bumps in the road. And I thought we were going to lose our job as beekeepers at the zoo on the very first day when we installed the bees. Because a funny thing happened. We put the bees in the hive, and we brought the hive inside, and we installed it in the wall, and all of a sudden bees started flying everywhere. And I was sweating. I was racking my brains. What did I do wrong? Where did our design go off? Is there, a gap somewhere? Is there a place the bees are sneaking out? And what I realized was it was a good sound design. It was just that when we had installed the bees, most of the bees went in the hive like they're supposed to, but bees have a mind of their own, okay? They go by their own rule book. And a whole bunch of sneaky bees climbed underneath the hive and were hiding on the bottom of it in one of these little ventilation little alcoves that we had designed so they could get enough airflow. And they were hanging out in that ventilation space, just waiting. So when we put it back up on the wall, they flew out and they were flying everywhere. And I have to tell you, what a class act they are there at the zoo. The staff there, they are so professional and they are so talented. Jill, she turns to me. She runs the activities in the Hamill Children's Zoo. She turns to me and she says, "Pete," she's saying, "don't worry about it. A few bees, that's nothing. You should see some of the things that have got loose in the zoo before," okay? So we got the butterfly nets and we collected the bees that we could, and then nothing. But I think from that moment forward, I realized I was with my people there. They are really just some wonderful, very talented folks there. Here's just a few slides of the construction. This is, it was an alcove. I think it was a reptile cage prior to the design, and they were showing us a number of places where it could potentially go, and I think our concern was the flyway. Where would the bees be able to fly in and out of? Ideally would like to have a place where they could fly in and out, where the public could see it, but yet not be in the way of the public. So we came up, and which side do we face? The south side, where the sun is shining, and with the brick face and the stone face, we decided the north side would be better, so that the heat retention on the entrance would be kept to a minimum. So there's quite a bit of design work. There's that interlocking gate I was talking about. That's what the completed design looks like. You can see it's actually a 10-frame hive, but 5 frames are visible. And for a while there, they were saying, Pete, we think the queen only comes out when you're here, but now I get updates every day from the zoo. They click a picture and text it to me. They say, oh, we saw her today. Here she is. So there's some really neat activities. Now, if you look at those 2 holes there on the wall, that's the entrance. So the bees fly in and out of those holes, and they climb through a tube and enter the hive. And I had a discussion with the carpentry team there. I said, I think we can do something a little more creative with these entrances, and I said, let's put some thought into this and come up with some ideas, and here's what we settled on here. All right, so you've all been to the zoo and you recognize this is the south gate entrance, right? Well, we want to make sure our bees get special treatment when they come in and out too. So you love that, huh? And so here it is during the holidays. It's decorated with a little Christmas tree on front, but you see the gate there, and that's the south gate entrance. So that's one of the holes. And then the other one, we said, let's make it look like one of the homes, here in actually Brookfield, but let's make it look like one of the homes. So we did the Weber kettle, the beer cooler, and the pink flamingos on the front lawn. So they have a nice entrance ramp to fly in and out of there at the zoo. I'm going to go ahead and come back and let Kim talk more about the different honeys that we produce. One of the things I want to do here is talk about, how did we get involved in this? And when Mom came to visit and said, Pete, your garden, my mom, by the way, is a master gardener. She came to visit, and my garden was flat. I mean, the plants were growing, but there was just no fruit, no tomatoes, nothing. She said, you don't have any pollinators. And she said, don't you remember how much fun that was when you were a kid? You need to get yourself a beehive. And that's how the whole thing got started with my mom. Eventually I became the president of the Cook-DuPage Beekeeping Association. And when I became the president, my phone started ringing off the hook every day all summer long. I'd get a call from somebody and they would say, Pete, you got to get over here now. I'm like, what's going on? Well, a tornado of bees has just descended upon my home and I don't know what to do and I need you to come over and get them out of here. And so one thing led to another, and I was, with the carpentry skills I had learned as a kid and the beekeeping skills I had acquired, just started, of course, the licenses that the fine state of Illinois requires us to get to be able to open up houses and remove frames, colonies of bees. We were able to put a business together. And here's a slide of Kim removing a colony of bees from a home that was built in 1867 in East Dundee. So I'll go ahead and play that for you.
So now all of our home is exposed. I think this is as far down as it goes. Again, so far the bees have been really gentle. So what I'm going to do, usually I have my grandpa's knife with me, but I don't know where it is, so I'm going to use this bread knife and start kind of slowly cutting the comb away, very gently, without getting too much honey. And then I'm going to carefully look for the queen. I don't see her on here, but I don't know if you can look in there. You can see there's lots of eggs and larvae. So she's a prolific queen, and if you can see here, wow, yep, they're just getting ready to cap this off. So they may have already swarmed. Look at that. So this is a queen cell, and you can see the larva in there. That's just about ready to get capped off. So usually when that happens, you know, they take off with, you know, anywhere for up to half of the hive flies out with the existing queen. So that may have already happened. You know, they're not acting too aggressive, like there's not a queen, but they do have lots of brood pheromone in here still. You know, there's lots of brood. If it did swarm, by looking at the eggs in here, it would have just happened. So we'll keep digging and see what we can find. But yeah, I definitely think if they haven't swarmed already, they're getting ready to.
Well, we were able to find the queen, and in fact, what we do then is we take all the comb that you see in the wall there and rubber band that into frames. And then we take those frames and put them in a hive, and we reunite the bees that we've collected and vacuumed out, reunite the bees with their furniture, with their comb. You see, that comb represents their life's work. It's made of wax, and it takes 8 pounds of nectar to make 1 pound of wax. So when you remove the colony of bees, you just can't take the bees. You really have to bring this comb along. And it's really helped us with our success rate when we do remove the bees. You know, just like any patient in a hospital, you know, we give the bees an IV, essentially. We nurse them back to health. And what do I mean by that? We'll give them sugar syrup, I mean glucose, right? And then we'll also give them a protein bar. And what will happen then is once that queen is able to start digesting some of that protein and stimulate, you know, get stimulated to lay the eggs, that hive kind of comes back together again. And then we have this new colony of bees that we're able to take and put out in the field and put them in a meadow somewhere where then there's an abundance of goldenrod or wild you know, blackberries, or in a cranberry bog in Wisconsin, or a blueberry field, or you know, any stands of linden trees and so on. And so, well, I'll show you. There's a few more slides here. You know, naturally bees love to live in the trees, and when a storm comes through, a tornado, and knocks down trees, and the service companies come to take those trees away, sometimes they get slowed down a little bit by that, as you can imagine. I'm going to just show you something here real quick, okay? I have to ask y'all, I love to ask this question. Who's in charge of the hive, okay? Who's in charge of the hive? How many folks say the queen bee? Anybody? Yeah, few. How many say the drones, the male bees, are in charge? All right, and then who says the workers? All right, good. All right, you all got the right answer. You must have heard this presentation before. You know, it's funny because school age.
Just know the females do all.
Exactly. Well, it's funny. The school age kids, they all raise their hand. They all say the queen, and then it makes sense after you. Exactly. So we love to play this game with the kids too. You know, I call it, you know, Where's Waldo? Do you see the queen on that slide there? You see her? There she is right there. Okay, so congratulations. Now you're all honorary beekeepers and you can all spot the queen, right? Here's one. Here's what it looks like when a queen hatches. You saw that peanut-shaped cell on the video where Kim's doing the cutout. This is what it looks like when they hatch out of that cell. So she's coming out. And what's remarkable is how large the abdomen is. I was so excited when this happened. I picked up the queen and dropped my phone. So that's life. I didn't lose the queen though. An interesting side note about queens, you know, as I mentioned, the source of protein is pollen. And in fact, a queen bee can lay anywhere from 1,500 to 2,500 eggs a day in the height of the summer. So think about that, 1,500 eggs a day. 21 days later, that means there's 1,500 new bees hatching out, okay? And so a hive may start in the season around 8,000, 9,000, 10,000 bees and can very easily reach 60, 70, 80,000 bees by the height of the summer. And so to be able to lay that many eggs, a queen bee needs to eat 100% of her body weight in protein every single day. Every single day. Now think about that, 100% of your body weight. So if I'm a 200-pound guy, I'm a little bit more than that, but if I'm a 200-pound guy, that's like me driving up to McDonald's and saying, can you fill up 800 quarter pounders for me? I mean, if I'm trying to keep up with the queen, that's how much she eats. And she doesn't go forage for that. She's got the whole team that they are by design. They bring that right to her, and you know, she gets fed that way. So here's a couple of one of our hives in Pumpkin Field in Waterman. And the delight of pollinating pumpkins, pumpkins start to bloom a little bit after 4th of July. And usually here in Northern Illinois, July and August, and even part of September, they're very, we call it a dearth. They're dry months in terms of nectar and pollen. There's not a lot of pollen. Springtime is when we get our biggest availability of pollen and nectar. And it's called the spring flow. And then once you get into summer, it's hard, unless you put your bees on a pumpkin field. And at the end of the season, when you get the first frost and the pumpkins stop blooming, the pumpkins will bloom the entire summer all the way up until the first frost. When you collect that, you'll get an enormous crop of honey, and you'll taste a very subtle squash aftertaste. And it's not like a pumpkin spice latte at your favorite coffee shop, but it's definitely, you can tell that there's you know, that they've been on the pumpkins, okay? I'll just take a few more minutes and talk more about you know, bees and native plants. So let's talk about what are native pollinators. And I should ask y'all a quick question. Are honeybees, is the honeybee native to the United States? How many say no, it's not native? All right, is it a yes or no? How many say it is native? Oh, you guys, you definitely have heard my presentation before. And most people raise their hand and say, no, it's not native. And in fact, they've found fossil evidence of the honeybee in the shale plates of Nevada. Professor Michael Engel discovered that the fossil, the jaw, the mandible, the wings, the pollen, the corbiculus, which is the pollen sac, actually in the shale. And so the honeybee has been on our continent since the beginning of time. But you might recognize on this slide, you might recognize a few of them, the bald-faced hornet, the bumblebee, the carpenter bee, wasps, yellow jackets, and so on. All of these have a role in pollinating. I'm going to go ahead and skip a few ahead. Here are the slides of the Michael Engel's discovery. So for over 14 million years, we've had honeybees. But there is an insect apocalypse going on right now. A study that was done over multiple decades in Germany, in this equivalent of their park district, they would send out a team of volunteers to collect a butterfly net sample full of insects, and they would, on a weekly basis throughout the summer, weigh that mass of insects that they collected. And what they discovered over a 30-year period is that they lost 80% of their insect population. In the United States, we're not doing much better. Between 1990 and 2020, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service estimated that North America may have lost 1 billion butterflies, and that since the late 1990s, the rusty patch bumblebee abundance has declined by over 87%. Okay, and there's lots of questions about what is at the root of this, or what could be the cause of this loss. And I will tell you, it's not the honeybee, although there's quite a few papers and newspaper articles that are published that are trying to blame the honeybee for the decline. But Kim and I see other things happening out there that are kind of in conflict with that idea. Here's, for example, here's 3 of our beehives out in a canola field. This is an all-organic 280-acre field farm where the farmer doesn't use any spray or anything like that. And that canola is blooming in early spring. Our bees are out there feasting on it. And here in the foreground, in these dandelions, you can see these bees. These are actually long antenna bees. And so what you see, the slide, and then in the background, you can see those little nucleus colonies that I was referring to, showing earlier. That these bees actually live harmoniously amongst one another, and they seek different sources of pollen. Okay, what I believe, and our experience, what we see going on, it really is, I think more of the decline in the pollinators here locally is can be attributed to a couple things. And again, this is our opinion on what we're seeing is a loss of farmland heterogeneity. In other words, monocrop agriculture. So if you go out to Kane County, LaSalle County, and DeKalb County, as far as the eye can see, it's cornfields and soybean fields. Now there are a few pumpkin patches interspersed there, but and I'm not criticizing or calling into question, the American farmers and the farming practices. They really they do what they have to do to be able to make a living and to pay their bills and put food on the table, and we literally are the breadbasket of the world. But I do think that we need to think about this and consider ways to do it differently. Okay, I'll tell you, across the United States, and I'm talking about Illinois, but across the United States, 33% of crops grown are either corn, soy, or wheat. Okay, here in Illinois, over 93% is corn and soy. So there's very few cover crops. There's no meadows. There's no alternating, like, when I grew up out in the farmlands of Pennsylvania, the farmers alternated rows and alternated crops from one season to the next. They spread manure. Today, when a farmer wants to fertilize in LaSalle County, they buy a tank of ammonia. Why ammonia? Well, it's NH3, so they're putting nitrogen back in the soil, and they'll spray this liquid ammonia. Well, when our organic farmer, Paul here, decides he wants to fertilize, okay, he'll plant clover. Okay, he plans this out way in advance. He plants clover. Well, clover doesn't fertilize, okay? But then what he does is he takes his prize sheep and he grazes his sheep over the clover, okay? And as they eat the clover, they deposit their little fertilizer pellets, if you know what I'm talking about. They spread it all over the field, okay? And he grazes them one section, and then a few days later, after that's gone, the next section, and all naturally he's able to fertilize his crop. That's where you want to put your honeybees if you're going to collect a crop, if you're going to get a crop of honey. That is the type of environment that we look for. And so it took Kim and I 5 years of asking, every bee class we had, every public place, hey, does anybody know anyone growing an all-organic farm that's growing canola, that's growing buckwheat, that's growing some of these different crops that we're seeking? But to find someone that's close by, it was a real difficult challenge to find that. The other situation we're experiencing is what's referred to as agricultural intensification. By intensification, what we're trying to do is trying to derive every ounce of crop from each acre of land as possible. And to do that, you want to minimize the use of, or you want to minimize the presence of weeds, and also minimize losses in the fall due to mold, crops molding from rain and wet storage. So in order to do that in the spring, there's quite a bit of Roundup and glyphosate being sprayed all over, and you can always tell when it's been sprayed. You'll see there'll be a lush green field, and then next to it will be a field that's all brown, and so it's a weed killer, and so there's quite a bit of that being sprayed in the ground, and also in the fall. Then particularly in wheat, but there's quite a few other crops, soybean, cotton, where there's wheat, oats, barley, and so on, where if you spray with glyphosate in the fall, it hardens the kernels and gives them resistance to moisture and so on. So you wind up getting a double treatment of glyphosate. This is a map of the population density of the United States. At the time, I think there was about 300 million or 330 million people living in the United States. Just to try to give you a sense of a big number, how do you get your head around 300 million, right? That's about the population of the US. Well, 300 million also happens to be about how much glyphosate is dumped onto our farmlands every single year, okay? So a pound of glyphosate per person, that's pretty heavy, heavy usage, all right? And again, I'm trying to encourage other ways to think about this. 50 countries have banned the GMOs. When we talk about GMOs, genetically modified organisms, they're modified so that they can actually grow and withstand glyphosate and some of these other sprays. So you just have to remember that that in the food chain, this is a hawk that happened to be perched outside of a presentation as I was walking in to give the presentation, and that hawk, I didn't photograph it, but it had in its talons a mouse, okay? And if you think about the food chain, okay, those mice are eating, they're foraging about in these areas that were sprayed, and then the hawk eats that, and it's all related. So some thoughts, what can we do? All right, these are the three things that we suggest. Plant native plants if you can, rather than the ornamental varieties. The ornamental plants have very little pollen value for our native pollinators. So if you're able to plant native plants, you see some beautiful grasses and coneflowers in this picture. That's wonderful. I'd also encourage you to shop local. The choices that you make at the grocery store or at the farmer's market, they have an impact and they make a difference. And then finally, if you're able to plant trees, one blooming tree can have the equivalent of 2 to 3 acres of wildflowers. Now, we don't all have 2 to 3 acres in our backyards that we can plant with native plants and prairie grasses and coneflowers and so on. But if you could plant one tree, that's going to give you leverage, okay? We have linden trees out at our bee farm, and when those linden trees open up, the entire canopy of the tree is filled with all types of pollinators, our honeybees included, and we're able to get a delicious linden crop within, fill up the hives within a week as that tree starts to bloom. We organized our planting around the time of year, and we encourage folks to say, if you're going to plant a pollinator garden, plant species that will, different species, such that every month there's something coming in and blooming. I talked about April, May, June. The early part is the spring flow, because that's when all the trees are blooming. One of the last trees for the buds to come off. In fact, I saw magnolias buds were starting to blow off the tree. So the magnolias are just about done for the season already. The linden tree is one of the last ones to lose its bud, and that's usually you know, the third week of June, toward the end of June. But if you're able to plant something that blooms in June, something that blooms in July, in August, and September, and so on, there's always going to be pollinators that will be visiting your yard, or always be some food available for them. Here are some of the trees that are preferred by the honeybees. You can see the basswood, black locust, cottonwood, and so on, poplar, tulip poplar. Some of these trees produce the most delicious honey that you've ever experienced. The herbs are wonderful for the pollinators. We talked about shopping local at farmers market, planting trees. These are some of the organizations that we support that you know, grow their own. You know, more farm stand and less McDonald's. So not picking on them, but I think we're trying to say, what can we do? Arbor Day, if you're able to plant a tree, that's awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the presentation over to Kim, and she's going to talk about some of the different products that we produce, particularly our honey and our skincare products. So,
Can you hear it from over here? Am I loud enough? Okay, so yeah, Pete mentioned that.
For the taping.
Oh, for the taping? I have a microphone, yeah. So Pete mentioned after we rescue the bees from people's houses, then we kind of nurse them back to health, and then we send them out to do a lot of pollination for local farmers. So by doing that, we get a variety of different delicious honey. I think there's probably 12, 13, 14 varieties, you know, all told, from sending our bees out, you know, to different, you know, farmers. So I'm going to kind of go through some of them. You know, Pete mentioned we do cranberries and blueberries up in Wisconsin. So this is cranberry honey from pollinating the cranberry bogs. And what's kind of neat is you can actually pick up on a little bit of that tart cranberry. You know, it's not going to jump out at you because it's not infused. This is all just from the bees visiting the specific blossoms. So cranberry is, again, great for like urinary, kind of like the juice. Orange blossoms from pollinating the citrus down on the Indian River down in Florida. So again, you'll be able to pick up on this citrus. The orange is known to have high antioxidants. And the blueberry, again, it's more like you can picture there on blueberries. It's not going to jump out like, oh, blueberry. But you're like, yeah, you taste it, and you're like, yeah, I can kind of picture there on blueberries. Blueberry is good for GI, so if you have acid reflux, anything like that, blueberry honey is good. The pumpkin, Pete mentioned, it's kind of sweet with a little, you know, squash aftertaste, which is kind of neat. Buckwheat, so this real dark kind of molasses. It's considered like the Guinness beer of the honey world. So this is actually the 280-acre all-organic seed farmer. He plants the buckwheat as a cover crop to enrich his soil so he doesn't have to do all the chemicals. So when the buckwheat's blooming, the bees go out and pollinate this. This is kind of, buckwheat is kind of considered like the Manuka honey. If you've heard of Manuka honey from New Zealand, this is kind of like our version of Manuka honey here. So it's supposed to have over 10 times the antioxidants, vitamins, and minerals compared to your lighter honey, high in iron. Tulip poplar, another kind of dark honey from the tulip poplar tree, which is in the magnolia family. What's kind of neat about that is, think of those big blossoms. So when the bees go out to forage with the tulip poplar tree, they can fill up their whole honey gut on just one blossom. And what's also neat about this tree is back in the day, the Native Americans, the early settlers, they used all parts of this tree to treat any ailment they had. So when they had fever back then for malaria, they used the bark, the blossoms, the roots of this tree to treat those ailments. So it's kind of thought that the honey is more medicinal. We get thistle, think of just like a purple thistle. A nice sweet honey. It's also a natural detox for your liver. Wildflower is just, you know, when we leave hives in one spot, like say in a backyard or whatever, it's kind of encompassing everything that the bees were foraging on, you know, throughout the season. So that's what we call wildflower. We do have a meadow wildflower, which is a little sweeter, from a 50-acre meadow. And then the linden from the basswood tree. It was kind of mixed with with clover. So it wasn't like, this one isn't full linden, but it's a nice mix. And the linden, you can always tell in the honey because it's kind of got like a smooth sweet with a little minty aftertaste. And then, last but not least, we have purple loosestrife, which is considered an invasive species here in the United States, but it was actually brought here for its medicinal properties.
It's a real floral honey. It's one of my favorites. It's good for winter respiratory. It's good for your eyes. And then I do have a little goldenrod. So that's our fall honey. So the bees were, pollinating this in the fall. So if you have fall allergies, this is a good go-to. And then I just have one little jar of Tupelo. So last season was the first year pollinating Tupelo down in the southwest corner of Georgia. So this is considered a diabetic honey. It has more fructose than glucose, so it won't spike the insulin, which is kind of different. Think of kind of like the cypress swamps down there. And then, when we harvest the honey, those frames that Pete was showing, we cut off the top layer, of the honeycomb, and we put it into an extractor, the frames, and it spins. Centrifugal force, goes out to the walls of the extractor and flows down through a gate valve. We just run it through a strainer just to get, the wax out and any bee parts or anything, and that's all we do. So it's completely, raw, it's not heated. But with that wax that we cut off, we make, all 100% beeswax candles. And we also do a soap that's all organic. The base is all organic, and then it has the propolis from the trees that the bees collect. So propolis is think of the bee's immune system. So they collect resins from the trees. Cottonwood trees are a typical one in our area, or even pine trees. And they bring back these resins to the hive, and they use that because it's antibacterial, antimicrobial, antifungal. So anything that, let's say a mouse crawled in the hive and, they stung it, killed it, and they can't, physically carry that mouse out. They would basically propolize it into a mummy to make everything, this is any little crack or crevice, they fill it with this resin. So we collected the resin to put in the soap, the beeswax is in the soap, and our honey. And then I also make a balm, which you can use on your face, your hands, your lips, and it's just our beeswax, our honey, and argan oil. So just 3 ingredients. And then we also do a body butter with some unrefined shea butter. Yeah, so that's, I think, the products. And then we have great, Pete was saying, what's one thing you can do? Even if you just plant a small little postage stamp of native plants, on your property, if we all just even did that, at least we would have continuous forage, for these native bees. So this is a great deck of a bunch of the native plants for the Midwest area. It's kind of like flashcards to learn them. And then have some great books, with the native bees and forage. Heather Holm, she's an awesome resource. And
Good.
And yeah.
Awesome. Do you have any questions? Yeah.
So when you were removing the comb, the hive from that house in East Dundee, it looked like you had a protective shirt on, but you certainly didn't have a hood on. When as a beekeeper do you decide you need a hood versus?
So usually I would say earlier in the season, the bees are definitely more docile. Especially when the main flow is going on, they're more wired to just collect, for nectar, because that's what they're going to use to sustain them over winter. So they're more into, just that mode of, okay, bring it back, collect. And then as the season progresses, they do tend to get a little bit more temperamental. Yeah, so going, going, towards the end of summer into fall, you'll definitely see me suit up more. Because now they've collected all that resource and they're storing it, they're going to be more protective of it. And also I will say those bee suits, they're hot. So when you're out, especially, I was up in a scaffolding, it's 90 degrees some of these days, you roast in there. So I kind of let the bees tell me, if I need to put it on, then I will put it on.
I'm realizing we should repeat the question. So I asked a question and I didn't follow the rule myself.
Thank you.
But yeah, you have a question?
I just wanted to know how long bees live.
So the question was, how long do bees live?
It's interesting to think about their lifespan. We can't kind of compare it to a human lifespan. Bees, a summertime bee, a worker bee, will typically spend its first 2-3 weeks inside the hive until it matures. There's a term called temporal polyetheism. So as they age, they take on jobs of greater and greater complexity. So once they become a forager, they are good to go for about 3 weeks, and they wear out their wings and they exhaust themselves, because from sunrise to sunset they are shuttling back and forth out to the fields where they're collecting nectar and bringing it back. So you have maybe at best 6 weeks for the entire lifespan of a worker. Okay. What's interesting about that, though, is that lifespan, the genetic clockwork is switched on and switched off, and it's a function of how much body fat. There's an amino acid, it's called vitellogenin, which in the presence of that in high amounts, which is actually found in their fat substances, that actually slows the aging process. And so bees that are born after the summer solstice, bees that are born late in the fall, in October and in early November, they will last through the entire winter. So they will last until March and April. So right now, going on inside the hive, the overwintered generation of bees are dying off, and the new spring bees are coming on. Okay. Queen bees can last 3 or 4 seasons, and the drone's job is to pass their DNA on to the next generation, and in doing so, they find a virgin queen to mate with. And upon completion of that, they expire. It just has to do with how their plumbing is wired, and the physical act of that causes them to perish. And so drones may last throughout the summer until they find that virgin queen and again pass their DNA on. And drones that are not successful in this mating flight process, as they return to the hive and the season goes on and on, come the end of the season, the workers, we talked about the workers making all the decisions, they decide whether or not they want to keep these hungry linebackers and feed them their limited resources throughout, and they all vote no. And so the first frost, you'll usually find a clump of dead bees at the entrance of the hive, and they'll all be the male bees. They'll all be the drones that they just got kicked to the curb, because the workers say, look, you weren't able to get it done anyway, so we don't want you around for another season. So, well, okay, it's kind of a polyamorous situation, and it turns out from a nature standpoint, the more drones that a queen is able to mate with, the higher the likelihood, the higher the survivability of the hive, because her offspring then have half of their DNA is from the queen, and then the other half is from any of the 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 drones that she was able to mate with. So in a hive, you'll have a mixture of this DNA. You'll have traits of the 20 fathers mixed with the trait of the mother. Now, that single bee only has one father and one mother, but her sisters may have the DNA from a different father and a different father, and that's how you get that genetic diversity, and that's why the bees have been able to survive all these seasons.
So the eggs are like drone eggs?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, please?
The eggs, I mean, the drones come from a certain kind of egg?
Oh yeah, so great question. How is it differentiated at birth? Yeah, so a queen bee, again, it gets back to who makes the decisions in the hive. Does the queen decide whether her offspring is a female or a male? Actually, no. The worker bees are deciding that, okay? Because when you look at honeycomb in the hive comes in 2 different sizes, okay? It comes in the small version and the large version. And the small version, the queen will lay a fertilized egg. She'll put her 4 legs inside the cell and measure the width and say, okay, small cell, I'm going to lay a fertilized egg. And that fertilized egg goes on to become a female. And she goes on to the next cell and the next cell, and she finds one that's a large cell, and you know, automatically she knows, keep the valve shut, don't allow the semen to flow from the spermatheca through the oviduct, close the valve and lay an unfertilized egg. And that unfertilized egg then develops into a drone. Okay, so that pattern of small cell versus large cell, it turns out it's about 80% or so small cell and 20% larger drone cell, typically found around the periphery of the structure. That's all determined by the workers. The workers are the ones that do that. The queen's just following the pattern that's laid out for her. So that's a classic example of, who makes the decisions in the hive. The workers decide on the population mix, not the queen. The queen follows the pattern. So.
No time.
Pardon?
There isn't a timer.
No.
There's time.
Yep. All right.
You showed a slide that had wasps on it.
Yeah.
And it was titled pollinators. I was always under the impression that wasps didn't collect pollen. They didn't function the same way as a bee functions.
Yeah.
Is that true?
So what, it's fascinating, this whole mechanism of pollination, how does it take place? And, when pollinators flap their wings, they build up static charge. And they fly into the flower. And that static charge is met by a grounded plant. And that charge transmits from the pollinator to the flower. And usually what happens is, in return, the pollen leaps from the flower onto the pollinator, whether that's a honeybee, a bumblebee, a carpenter bee, a wasp, a hornet, and so on. So they are, as they go into the flower to collect the nectar, they are also being coated with that pollen.
So indeed, wasps do look for nectar.
They are allowed.
Because I was always under the impression that wasps, they're the ones that land on your apple juice or
Correct.
Orange or whatever it is.
They are voracious nectar drinkers.
And a bee wouldn't do that same mannerism, right?
What?
A bee doesn't show up on your orange like a wasp does.
Right, because the bees are more interested in the natural sources of nectar.
Okay.
It's just their preference. Yeah, and bees never ever eat like a wasp. Wasps and hornets, yellow jackets, they're scavengers and they'll eat flesh. So they are omnivores. Okay, honeybees, they only eat plant protein and they only eat digest the nectar. It's fascinating because as you approach fall and resources are scarce, the life cycles are completely different. Wasps, hornets, and yellow jackets, as they go into winter, they die. And the only survivor is the queen wasp, the queen hornet, or the queen yellow, yes, in the wasp family. In the honeybee family, the entire colony survives the winter and forms a cluster and stays warm. Correct.
Warms up the queen, right?
Yep, exactly. So you have a complete die-off of the wasps and hornets. In the fall, those wasps and hornets are making more queens, and so they are really hungry for protein. And they're hungriest for protein at a time when protein sources, pollen sources, are scarcest. So they don't care whether their protein comes from a plant or whether it comes from a dead squirrel on the side of the road or a hamburger that's on your or whatever, or from another nest, whether that nest is a wasp, a hornet, or a honeybee colony. These insects are predators and will prey on one another's nests. So consequently, for honeybees, there's one of the job functions is guard bee. And these guard bees station themselves at the entrance to the hive. And if you are a honeybee that it's coming from a different hive and don't belong to that hive, they will sting and kill that honeybee and not let them in. If you're a wasp or hornet, they'll repel these borders, attempting to take over the hive. And it's warfare out there. They are literally, pardon?
Do the bees usually win that?
It depends. Sometimes a good strong colony of bees with a small tight entrance can fend off. But we have seen, and we've had friends where a bald-faced hornet nest can wipe out a full mature colony of bees in a matter of hours. And how do you know that? How do you know whether your colony got wiped out by honeybees, by another colony, or whether it got wiped out by hornets or wasps? Well, after the hornets go in, they usually clip they kill the honeybees, and they'll clip their body parts and remove their body parts and basically eat them, take them back to their nests, okay? So in the bottom of the hive, you'll find lots of dead, bee parts. Okay, if the hive was taken over by honeybees, usually they will rob and take all the honey, and then the weak hive that was already weak says, oh, there's no chance that we're going to survive at all, and they usually wind up leaving, and in many cases going with the marauding bees and going back and joining forces with them. So this concept of robbing, certainly does take place in the pollinator community. Yeah. What else? I could talk about bees all night long, and so could Kim.
Have all those separate honey.
Yeah, it's a lot.
The collection of.
18-hour days.
So we wind up having quite a few bottling tanks going. What's that?
You have employees?
So one of the neat things about being, Kim is also on the board of directors of the Beekeeping Association, is there's always new people wanting to learn how to keep bees. And I think just about everywhere we go, there is a crew of folks that if we make it known we're going somewhere, a crew magically shows up and wanting to help and learn. So it's the two of us, and then with all the help that we get, we're able to accomplish some magnificent things. I really am very proud of Kim and us and what we're able to get done. Well, we live actually in Villa Park, okay? But we have more than 22, I think 22 or 23 right now, apiary locations. Most of them are probably within a 5-mile radius of where we're at right here, 5 to 10 mile radius close by. But as Kim mentioned, we do have some apiaries up in Wisconsin. We have a new relationship that we've started with a farmer in Indiana, just on the other side of the border, that has huge goldenrod meadows and blackberry meadows. And we had this wonderful blackberry harvest last summer. We only got one pail, which is about 60 pounds of it, and it's sold like that. And so we're looking forward to expanding that relationship with them this year. It's really the whole bee season really is just getting started right now. So.
Are you selling your honey today?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yep.
Yeah, if you want to come up afterwards, we're happy to tell you or show you the samples of it. So.
Any further questions?
We can go as long as you like.
Kim will be available.
Yep, thank you.
at the presentation.
Thank you all.
So well, I would like to thank Pete and Kim for their presentation tonight. And I do have a few announcements, as usual, after a presentation. The Olmsted Society's next workday is, landscape workday is Saturday, May 3rd. They'll be working at Indian Gardens from 9 to noon. We are having another presentation here at the library on Thursday, May 8th, and that is Get Out and Play, the Health Benefits of Outdoor and Nature-Based Activities for Children. The presenters will be Dr. Ann Verdevec, and Catherine Very. Our first walking tour will be Sunday, May 25th. We're going to cover the north side of town for the first tour of the year, and then there's a walking tour on the last Sunday of every month through October. And then some of your old favorite Olmsted Society events are back this year. Vintage baseball is being planned. Hop Stop in September, and the Riverside Spooktacular Ghost Walk in October. In addition to Pete and Kim, I'd like to thank the library staff, especially Diane. And Brent has also been very helpful. I'm not sure if he's here tonight. And the rest of the staff that arranges the chairs both before and after the presentation. Thanks to Riverside TV for covering this event. A recording of it will be available on their YouTube channel. And thank you all for coming tonight. Okay.